You're listening to This Motorcycle Life, conversations about why we ride. Episode 11, In the Blood. I'm Bruce Philp. Thanks for listening. So, have you ever wondered what it would be like if the people closest to you really understood what motorcycling means to you? What it is to love that machine, or to prefer the journey to the destination, or to risk your life just to feel alive? Well, we're going to find out exactly what that would be like in a moment, but first a little business. As always, I want to acknowledge the promotional support of my friends at Eat, Sleep, Ride. The stories in these podcasts are about riders like you and me, and Eat, Sleep, Ride is a great place to meet them. You can discover this community magazine at eatsleepride.com, and as an avid user, I can also recommend that you download their free mobile app at your preferred app store. I don't ride without it. Thanks, guys. I also want to say thanks for the iTunes ratings and the emails that you've shared with me. They say the ratings mean a lot. The emails definitely do. And a special shout out to Stefan, who sent me an epic note about his love of riding last month, which, he told me, is so overwhelming that he's been known to scream in his helmet. Well, you're not alone, Stefan. And I guess that brings us to the subject of this episode. I recently came upon a post on an internet motorcycling forum that got me thinking. The poster had a dilemma that was clearly painful for him. And his dilemma was whether, as a father of 2 young children, he should continue to ride, or whether the right thing to do was hang up his helmet for good. A rider since the age of 10, he said it made him anxious now. He wrote, "I find that I feel guilty that I'm not spending time with my family rather than on my own. And I also worry about getting into an accident and not coming home to them. It just seems like the reward versus risk is shrinking every day." And then he added, "I can't believe it, but I'm thinking of selling my bike." Seeking perspective, I guess, he came to the people he thought would understand, fellow motorcyclists. And I think it's pretty obvious that he hoped they would give him some kind of narrative that would keep that bike in his life without making him feel like a bad father. Well, his internet motorcycle family came through. By the time the topic had worn itself out, he had decided to keep his bike, and now dreams of riding with his kids one day. And I was struck by how deciding to let his 2 worlds collide seemed to cheer him up and relight the fire. And that's the part that got me thinking. Like a lot of us, I am the only rider in our family, so I have some of the same hang-ups as our internet friend. But would it really be better if there was no boundary between my riding life and my family life? Would I be a good husband and dad if I actively enabled my wife and kids to take up riding? They've certainly shown an interest. It's complicated, and I honestly don't know the answer. But catching up on my podcast listening recently, I realized that I do know someone who does. Peter and Jonathan Boulton are the hosts of a wonderful weekly motorcycle podcast called NoCo Moto, whose listeners know them as Moto G Pete and Swiggy. They also happen to be brothers who come from a multi-generational family of riders. Motorcycles and family life are almost the same thing for them, and they enthusiastically agreed to share their experience. Now, alert listeners will notice that this interview sounds a bit different than usual, because it's my voice you'll hear on the phone, and theirs in a studio. And I'll tell you how that happened a little later on. In the meantime, I caught up with Peter and Jonathan in their mobile podcasting studio somewhere in northern Colorado. And here's our conversation.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Doing good. Good to talk to you.
Nice to meet you.
Good to talk to you. Nice to meet you, too. Since there's 2 of you, and I've never interviewed 2 people at the same time before, why don't we start by having you introduce yourselves so that people can follow your voices through the conversation.
Gotcha. So I'm Peter, or Moto G Pete, of the NoCo Moto podcast.
And I am Jonathan, or Swiggy, also of the NoCo Moto podcast.
Someday I want to know how you got that nickname.
It was well-earned.
Well, look, first of all, I want to say how much I love your podcast. It's one of the ones that I never miss. It's worth it just for best, worst bike in the world. You guys probably get that a lot. It's totally my favorite part of the show, but they're all great. And so far, only one of my bikes has made your best list, but none of them has made the worst, so we're still friends. Nice job. It's a great podcast, and I hope maybe some of the folks who are listening today might decide to add you to their list if they haven't already. And in fact, it was one episode in particular of your podcast that got me thinking that you might be perfect for this conversation, and that was the CODA episode back in April.
Right.
So I gather you guys headed down to the MotoGP in Austin, and you took your dad with you, which I think is where it dawned on me that he was also a rider. I think you guys rode down there, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And is that right?
Well, yeah. So we ride down every year, and quite often we all ride. But our father has a strange condition where every certain number of months or whatever, he gets these awful headaches. And so this year was a little bit different in that he was having these cluster headaches, and he had to take this medication for it, and it made him a little loopy. So he wasn't sure if he was going to be able to ride. And he almost backed out of going this year. And, we're really hardcore about doing a 1,000-mile ride, like straight shot down there every year, and we kind of said like, no, hold on. Like, we're not leaving you behind because you're having headaches. Like, come on. So we developed a plan where Swiggy and I would ride, passing off, riding the bike, and driving the truck, which was trailering extra bikes. So, we could all have, at least some short rides with him while we were down there. But because we are a riding family, we just said, no. There's no way we're not going to do this, with you because of this issue.
That's fantastic. I mean, I'm sorry that he's got to deal with this condition, but it sounds like you guys were awesome about it. And then, of course, we pick up the story with you guys in a camper or a tent in Austin. The three of you were there with a couple of friends, and I'm listening to you kind of sort of making race prognostications and throwing shade and hurling abuse and generally trash talking. And I kind of found myself envious, if I'm honest, and it got me thinking, because I'm the only one in my family who rides. So I'm mostly grateful for the support, but I'm not sure everybody in my family really gets it. It's kind of like I'm the weird relative who collects Furbies or something.
Right.
But you guys have this common ground, and it just seemed so cool to me. So why don't we start with an introduction to who in your family rides and what they ride and for how long? Give me the resumes just to kind of set the table.
Oh, geez. So, if we go way back, pretty much. Let's see, my father, a grandfather on our mother's side. I don't know for certain if my father's father or our father's father rode, but he probably did to some extent. The family all comes from the Midlands in England, and it's sort of ground zero for British motorcycles. And I think it's just always been something in the family to one degree or another. So honestly, as far as, who started riding first, we really don't even know. Like, when was the first motorcycle in England? That's probably the answer. So let's see. I know our grandfather on our mother's side, he had some sort of old 352 stroke, which was sold right before my mother was born, only because, in fact, the doctor caught my grandfather and grandmother riding the motorcycle like a couple months before our mother was born and said, you can't do that. You got to buy a car. And he could only afford one vehicle. So I think he mostly left it there. He also had a couple hairy crashes, but was never, he didn't I don't know. It's one of those life got in the way situations. But my father and his brothers, they all bought all kinds of bikes, in the 60s and 70s in Birmingham, buying broken down junk stuff, fixing it up, trading up, everything. It was just a way of life for them. Lambrettas, Vespas, Nortons, everything, right? And then Dad kind of took a break, and he came back to riding. I started riding sort of, I guess, in the middle of when Dad wasn't riding, when he took like a 10, 14-year kind of break from it. And after that, let's see, our brother Richard got a bike. He's got what is it? It's an XS400. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't long after that Swiggy here got a, what was your first bike? The 1000, right?
Yeah, it's a 1983 CB 1000.
Yeah. And then, sort of out of nowhere, after I bought a couple crappy bikes and Dad was helping me fix them up, he just sort of just went out and bought a Ninja out of nowhere, which was a great thing. And let's see, as far as the immediate family, so that would be the four of us that ride. But then, we sort of developed a non-blood riding family around us, as I think a lot of people do as well. But, we were actually just discussing last night all the different kinds of bikes that we just currently have between just me, Swiggy, and Dad. And, between, what have we got? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 bikes between the three of us right now. And it covers cruisers, sport bikes, enduros. We've had dirt bikes and, just everything, So in terms of who rides and what do they have, I don't know. You got to just kind of check all of the above in both columns.
Right. Yeah, that's and the list is, I've sort of followed it, through your podcast. It's pretty agnostic. Like, you guys ride everything. I love the fact, Swiggy, that you have a Norge, which strikes me as a strong statement of nonconformity.
We love weird stuff. Probably highlighted by my obsession with the Bergman 650 executive.
Yeah, I am somewhat proud. Well, I'm somewhat amused by the fact that in my current stable, the big red Italian motorcycle is the safest and most reliable one that I've owned so far.
Yeah.
Moto Guzzi's keep making these weird appearances in the conversations that I have for these podcasts. I think there's some kind of destiny out there waiting for me, in the big red Italian department. But so how did it actually start for you guys? Like, it sounds like you started riding. The two of you started riding as adults, or did your dad get you into it when you were kids, or how did that go?
So Peter started much earlier than I did. And you've been riding for what, like 12 years now?
Like 14.
Like 14 years?
Yeah.
I'm just coming up on my 4th year of riding, or having done 4 years of riding. And it was kind of just one of those things where it was just, at a certain point, if nobody tells you can't do something, and then you realize you're allowed to give yourself permission to do it, and there's just no financial or logistical barriers to it happening. And so it just happened in the span of about 3 weeks, from knowing nothing to getting a license to getting the bike and registering it.
Yeah, it was about like 7 hours for me, that process. I was sitting, I was like 19 or 20, something like that, and I was just sitting in my apartment, just all alone, no one there, just hanging out with my dog. And I didn't have a TV, I didn't have anything, I didn't have a stereo, I didn't even have real furniture. I had a dentist chair in the living room, just weird stuff like that. And I was just, the only thing I had, me and my roommate had a computer just sitting on like a cardboard box or something. And I was sitting there, and I'd just been doing nothing but working like crazy. And I had some money saved up. And I just, kind of thought, I've always wanted a bike. It just popped in my head. And I noticed, like Swiggy said, you come to this point where, nothing's stopping me. And so I went over to the computer and went over to eBay, and like 23 minutes later had purchased 81 Nighthawk 650 for like $700, and maybe it was 780, but that's tops, right? And then it showed up the next morning. The dude trailered it down for me, and he lived like 3 hours away too. And I probably won the auction at 10 at night, and he was there at like, I don't know, 6, 7 in the morning, just with the bike, and that was it. I gave him cash, and no, I didn't give him cash. I had to write him a check. And he was fine with that. It was really strange. And I had to leave for work, so I had to leave the check with my neighbor even. It was really bizarre, but everything worked out fine. And then after I got off work, I took it into a parking lot a couple blocks from my house, just rode in circles, practicing going in and out of second gear, and then I was off down the road. No safety gear, no test, no license, no permit, no nothing. It was really stupid, but nothing was going to stop me. That's how quickly I took to it. And then it was, of course, only days before I was trying to tell all my friends that they needed a ride. And then,
right.
Of course, I ran into all these mechanical problems, so I needed to call Dad in for support to help me fix all these junk bikes that I was buying and selling, because it was just constant after that, just, buying, selling, trading, fixing. It's been like that ever since, But that thing that Swiggy just said about giving yourself permission, that's a big thing. I've been thinking a lot about this aspect of our family riding, right? And it seems that a big barrier for people is this idea of permission to ride a motorcycle. And when your family rides, that door is always sort of left cracked open, right?
Right.
And I think, when someone's family doesn't really agree or understand your choice to ride, then you kind of have to look for that acceptance and that permission somewhere else. You find some sort of other motorcycle role model, right? So guys will often join clubs, whether they're MCs or just a riding group or whatever, and they come with certain rules or whatever, and you kind of figure out how you're going to ride, what kind of rider you're going to be through that. But when it's your family, it's really interesting because your family already knows you. Your family doesn't need you to jump through any hoops, right? So the bike just sort of falls into your life like water into a puddle, right? Rather than having to do all these extra things to be a certain kind of rider, to be with this group of people that don't necessarily know you that well right off the bat. When your riding group involves a lot of your family, they already know you and accept you. So it's easy just to ride your bike to work every day, and it doesn't seem weird. It doesn't seem strange, and it's fine to, take if everyone's going on a trip somewhere, I'm going to ride the bike, and no one really thinks you're strange or antisocial when they're all driving in the car, and you're like, no, I'm just going to ride the bike, and follow you guys. It just fits into your life very, very easily, and I think it's a very lucky thing that we have, and other people who have, a whole family that rides, that I think everyone's sort of looking for, but not everybody has.
Yeah, that's a great insight. And it makes me think that a lot of people who start riding, are motivated by some kind of need to rebel, which is sort of a reaction to, to the absence of permission, if you like. And you guys, I'm kind of curious now about how you chose to rebel when you were younger, because clearly you didn't do it by riding motorcycles. But the payback is that your family understands you. That is a radically different experience that I think a lot of riders have.
Yeah, as far as rebellion, geez, I don't know. A lot of weird hair colors and skateboarding, I think. I did a lot of that.
Yeah.
But, I mean, by the time I was 19 or 20, I was kind of over a lot of that rebellion. So, in a strange way, like, motorcycles really only became bigger in my life as I was getting more mature.
Huh.
I mean, I was always fascinated by bikes as a kid, but there was never, I don't know, it just never seemed like a possibility until one day. I knew there was permission, like I said. I knew it was okay, but it wasn't like something that I could just really fully do. We moved a lot when we were kids, and a lot of things seemed very temporary. And I think I mentioned in a couple episodes of our show, talking about how Dad had this big 300cc scooter when we lived in Tokyo, and we'd all ride on that. And so it was nothing that was ever not present in some sort of way. Dad's old helmets were always around. I remember a lot of summers watching, Formula One and motorcycle racing, GP of whatever iteration it was in or being called at those times. And I wasn't so much interested in sport bikes. I remember Dad being like, no, you got to sit down and watch this, Pete. These are the most amazing bikes. You have no idea. and sort of thinking like, okay, well, maybe I should pay a little attention to this. But, like, it's interesting you say rebellion. Like maybe Dad kind of used it as something to sort of rebel in a way. He was the first of us to buy a sport bike. He bought that Ninja when we sort of had rather tame cruiser bikes, and then he really lost his mind when he moved here to Colorado and got a Ducati. Yeah, he bought a Ducati at like 62, something like that. Was that right, Sylvia? Yeah, it was great. It was absolutely fantastic.
That is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, one of the tamer, but an SS800, but still a pretty serious sport bike, and 62. And he rode it to Sturgis. Just, the 62-year-old guy riding a Ducati to Sturgis. This 62-year-old English guy riding a Ducati to Sturgis. He was something to see. Or still is, riding weird bikes and doing weird things like that. So, maybe he might be the most nuts of all of us in a strange way. I know that I remember when I was having major problems with my CB350, and I was living in Indiana, and my brother was working for this, brother Richard, who also rides, was working for this staging company, and he was driving the trucks for extra money. Anyway, he came through my town, and he was able to clear some extra space in the back of this truck, and he was going through Denver, so he picked up my bike and drove it across the country so Dad could have a look at what was going on with it, see if he could figure it out. And then just for fun, rather than have it shipped back to me or me come out and get it, Dad rode this CB350 all the way from Denver to Indianapolis, essentially, in 2 days. And the range on that bike's only about 80 miles. So you had to find a gas station every 80 miles. And, he tells the story of someone meeting him in a gas station. And they said, where are you coming from? And he points and he goes, about 500 miles that way. And he goes, where are you going? He's like, about 700 miles that way. And the guy said to him, well, clearly, you're retired, because I'm not aware of anyone currently drawing a paycheck that would do this sort of nonsense. And, so, that's sort of where we come from, where we're sort of game to do big, stupid rides and buy weird motorcycles and do weird things with them. It's just sort of, I don't know, we have built-in permission to do so, because that's just sort of the culture we come from. Yeah.
That's cool. It's funny. I was sort of picturing you guys maybe like growing up on bikes, riding around monkey bikes in your backyard at 6 and kind of like gasoline in your veins. And it sounds like your dad was super supportive and remains so, but it doesn't sound like he was trying to sell this to you when you were young. Is that right, or was it more complicated?
I think there is absolutely zero pressure for any one of us to get a bike. There wasn't really any suggestion that we should get a bike. It was truly just that, the door is open and the permission was there. And then
right.
We each individually came to the conclusion that we wanted a motorcycle, and then went and got our licenses and got our bikes.
It's true, but at the same time, there was this sense that it was this thing within the family that was just growing, right? I said on one of our more recent episodes, I said, everyone listening to this show is probably that person that everyone knows that, got other people, right? They're probably that guy that, whoever's enthusiastic to go around riding, listening to motorcycle podcasts, and not just spend all the time that the bike requires wrenching on it and riding on it and all that stuff, but then be listing all this stuff. You're probably one of those people that sort of infects everyone around them with the motorcycle bug. And in a way, I was sort of that person in the family, right? I got into it, and I just got into it so enthusiastically that everyone's sort of like picking up around me. And now it's just this thing where we're just all equally into it. The other day when I was dropping by Dad's house, and we chit-chatted for a couple things, then he got this look on his face, like, you know, like he looked at me with the kind of excitement that I usually only see when, like, my 7-year-old comes up to me and tells me he's discovered how to do a new move in Street Fighter, right? And he's like, I was talking to this guy that was, you know, staying at our bed and breakfast, and he's got this old Greaves with a Villiers 2-stroke, and he doesn't know what he's going to do to it. I think he's going to sell it to him, and he's also got this, you know, this BSA, you know, 440 Victor, and I might get that too. And no. He's like, oh, you're going to wet yourself when these bikes show up. It's going to be amazing. You know, or even just 2 days ago, he called me, and we were chit-chatting about things, and you know, one of the first, you know, I don't know, within the first 5 minutes, he just goes, oh, you know, how's the bike running? He's just genuinely concerned and wanted to know. Had no reason to think it wouldn't be running great, right? You know, it's not like, you know, I'm 19 in college, and he's like, you know, how's the car running, son, right? And he was genuinely concerned how my bike's running, and you know, or even when Swiggy got his Moto Guzzi, you know, I announced it on the show. I said, you know, we've got a new addition to the family, right? And that was a joke, but, you know, kind of serious, you know, because all our bikes, you know, because we're a family and there's all that implicit trust, we all get to sort of ride each other's bikes kind of as much as we want, right? You know, before Swiggy had put, you know, 300 miles on that Norge, I had taken it over by Dad's house, and I was like, oh, you got to jump on this thing and try it. It's great. And it never occurred to me that he wouldn't be okay with that, right? I'm just taking his bike and having other people ride it, right? But, you know, that's just how we are. I don't think, with the exception of the Harley that Dad just got very recently, we've all ridden everyone's bikes, like, to no end, on long trips, you know, as well. And that's a great aspect of it too, that because we're all equally enthusiastic, right? We all share all of, you know, what we've got in it, and all our knowledge around different things about the bike. So it's a shared hobby for us, and it definitely brings us, you know, pretty close together. There's a lot of days that maybe I wouldn't go by the house and you know, hang out with my parents, but, you know, there's something bike related to do, even if it's something small, and I'll go by and we'll chit chat and we'll do a couple bike things. But, you know, then I end up, you know, hanging out in the kitchen talking with my mom as well about whatever else is going on. It's just another great excuse to drop by. So there's a lot to it, and there's a little extra benefits that come along the side with it. Yeah.
Yeah, so still a little envious. What do all the... I mean, motorcycling is a pretty intense passion. You know, I can't think of more than a handful of things that people do with their spare time that are, you know, more so than that. What do the people in your family who don't ride make of all this? How do they fit in?
Well, let's see. Mom 100% wishes none of us rode, but, you know, to her credit, stays very quiet about that. You know, she'll mention, she's like, well, I'm glad you're all wearing helmets and trying to be safe, and that's about as much as she'll mention about it. And then I don't know. I guess our youngest brother Oliver, he doesn't really get it, does he? He hasn't really been bitten by the bug. I mean, he's not completely disinterested, but for whatever reason, he hasn't sort of gone down that path as enthusiastically. But let's see, who really doesn't ride? I mean, yeah, I don't know. I think it's because we are so. Because especially like the core of us, like, you know, the four of us that ride are much, much closer because we share this thing. I don't think they really feel like they have much ground to attack us on it because, you know, besides a few little small mishaps, some 20-mile-an-hour crashes or some little things here or there,
Which Mom still doesn't know about.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't think she listens.
Right, she doesn't listen, so we're safe.
Yeah, that was a great moment. Shortly after a fairly low speed but scary accident, and both of us kind of being taken back 20 years and reliving reenacting the whole "don't tell Mom" scenario.
That was fun. Yeah, besides like a few little small things, everything that's come out of it has been really positive for us. So I don't think they have much grounds to really attack us. So, if any wives, girlfriends, mothers, or, anyone that doesn't really fully get it, they don't really have much of a leg to stand on when, they try to, if they don't want to be positive about this thing that we're so so passionate about, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I have to imagine there's some ambivalence. I mean, I feel that as a rider, there's a part of me that wants to sort of pitch this to everybody around me because I want them to have as much fun as I am, and then there's another part of me that doesn't want to be in any way responsible for encouraging something that's dangerous, so I just kind of clam up. I wonder if maybe that's what. Obviously, I'm purely speculating here, but I wonder if that plays some kind of role in your mom's perspective on it. Because to watch, your husband and sons connect like this as adults, and in such an intimate way, has got to be a pleasure for her on some level.
Oh, I'm sure it is, but she'll never bring herself to admit it.
Right. Well, that's moms.
Yeah.
So I've said a couple times that I'm envious, and I kind of am. I mean, by way of confession, my dad actually rode on and off all his life, but he never brought it home, and he never made it part of his kind of story with the family. So it was always something I spectated, from a great distance, and I think it's just so cool that you get to do it on the terms that you do. But there's also there's sort of sitting on my opposite shoulder, there's this voice that's, I don't know if you heard the last episode of this podcast, but I talked to Freddie Spencer, and at one point...
Oh, yeah, that was wonderful.
Oh, thank you. At one point he said motorcycling is a very introspective pastime, and I thought that was a very frank and accurate, sort of statement, and it made me realize that there's a part of me that kind of wants to just keep it to myself. That, sometimes just heading out for a ride and putting some music on in my helmet and going and hooning around with no purpose and being alone with myself is exactly what I want. Do you ever find the close connection that you have with your family over motorcycling? Do you ever find it intrusive? Is it ever in the way of your experience?
No. No. So, when I'm like commuting to work on my bike, I'm by myself, and I think there's so much, like you said, and like Freddie said, it's a very solo introspective thing. That solo aspect is so built into it. Right? Like, there's no way to escape that, really. I mean, I guess you could make sure every time you ride you have a scene and you're talking to 6 people, but that seems like a lot of effort.
Yeah.
Because that's all sort of already built in. I'm really personally very interested in all the social aspects that can come with it as well. I mean, hence, we do a motorcycle podcast, and I'm constantly going up to people trying to talk to them about their bikes and all of that. I'm just really interested in people who are excited about their bikes. I've said you can take a person who I don't normally, wouldn't normally jive with very well, and a motorcycle that I don't particularly care for, but you put them together, and that person being enthusiastic about that bike, I'm in. I'll talk to that person all day. I'm their best friend, right? And so I'm interested about this, connection with people and their bikes and other people and their bikes. And, I feel there's always something I can learn. I can, discover more about myself through knowing other people riding. And so No, I mean, I just always want to go on a ride with people. And, me and Swiggy, we do these long trips together, and we have a very specific system we've worked out where we can ride together and swap bikes at certain mile intervals, and we can cover a lot of ground quickly that way. And it's a system, and it's a thing we've worked out over a lot of miles. So, even sort of in some ways, the actual physical part of riding has become a community thing for us.
Right.
Yeah, I would also add that if you're not just riding for pleasure and you really just worked it into your life to where you're commuting daily on your bike, when you can, you're doing your grocery shopping on your bike, you're running all your errands on your bike, and then you also have that social aspect as well. You get so much riding in that you always have that solo time and that time to introspect. So
right.
It's one of those things where I don't think there's many people who really just say, I want to be alone, and I want to be alone for as long as I can and get as much alone time as possible. I think there's a certain amount of alone time and introspection that you need. And if you've built it into your life, if you've built riding into your day-to-day life, I think you get enough of that.
Okay, so that's interesting. So you're maybe I just wasn't listening hard enough earlier, but you guys actually live this life. Your bikes are transportation, not just toys.
Oh yeah, yeah. If there's any option to ride instead of driving, absolutely. If it's over 40 degrees and there's no ice on the roads, it's happening.
Okay, that's interesting. So that kind of answers the question about alone time, because then your relationship with the machine is the same as a car enthusiast would be with a car. Sometimes he's getting groceries, and sometimes he's out by himself finding a twisty road to get lost on. I get that totally. So a couple of episodes ago, I've got a couple points in our conversation. I'm going to be guilty of log rolling here, but a couple of episodes ago, you guys had a great conversation about whether or not you're a different person when you put your helmet on, which I super enjoyed every minute of. And there were some great points made, and as I listen to you talk now, I'm wondering, you two are out on a long ride together, and you're swapping bikes every so often, and you've got a system worked out, and it strikes me that that's a situation in which the person you're riding with knows exactly who you are under that helmet. There is no mystery at all. You cannot escape all of your history and who you are. Is that true, and is that a good thing or a bad thing, or does it factor into the mix? Because it sounded to me when you had that discussion in the episode I was referring to, that experience of flipping the visor down and being anonymous to the world would have some value to you. How does that all work?
So I think in that situation, when Swig and I do these long rides, these iron butt rides or whatever we're doing, we sort of intentionally plan a trip that's going to put us through hardship, right? When you inject a little bit of pain, it kind of makes everything more memorable, right? And, in that situation, it's very, very good that we both know exactly who we are in the helmets. Because let's say, we'll be riding along and we'll be talking in the Cenas, but then we'll also just ride in complete silence for 50 miles or something as well. And I think like on the way back from Coda, because we were both able to ride on the way back from Coda, and there was a moment where on the super hot we'd made a wrong turn and we missed some gas stations, and we ended. It was all a disaster for a minute, and then some batteries fail. We ran low on some battery power for the Cenas. We couldn't talk, but we sort of were able to know exactly where our headspaces were at, and are we going to push it, for the absolute, limit on, the fuel tank of one of the bikes. And one bike was obviously much more comfortable to ride than the other, and know about what kind of mileage the other person's going to be okay with doing before we swap back, and all of that. Those are things that, help keep us safe when we're doing this stuff. Because when you're riding, 18, 19, 20, 22 hours even just straight, right? It's very good to be able to notice the other person, how they're riding, and, we'll remind each other to stay sharp, check your mirrors, all that sort of stuff. So I'm one of those people that's horrible with turn signals, and even to the point where like we'll be riding sometimes and Swiggy will be like, you're having a really good turn signal day,
I push that little button about 60 times every time I ride.
I just find myself concentrating on the corner itself too much and just forget about the turn signal. But yeah, there's a lot of ways in which that's very, very good. But I think as Swiggy, kind of already said, all that solo time as well is already kind of built in, right? We kind of ride so much. I probably do 80% of my riding, by myself. And then we meet up and ride together, once a week or once every couple weeks at least. But, rarely a week goes by where, it's above 40 degrees that I'm not riding at least 4 or 5 days of that week. So, we do definitely both spend a lot of time alone with, our thoughts and who we are. But when we're together, I would say the fact that we've spent so much time and we have that reveal and, again, with how much we talk about riding on the show, of course, we have a much better idea of who each other is on the bike, but I think it serves us well.
Yeah, clearly. Which actually brings up another question. You mentioned the show, and one of the things that that I'm always impressed by is how much you guys know about bikes and about the sport. And I was a bit surprised a few minutes ago to hear that Swiggy's still relatively new to it, because he always strikes me as being a bit of an encyclopedia. How did that happen? How do you guys get your intellectual, fulfillment around motorcycles?
Well, it's called an obsession, Bruce. There's just really not. I don't know. You're probably best to answer this, Swiggy. I don't know.
Well, I mean, so when Peter came up with the idea to start doing the podcast, it was probably about a year ago. The idea first came up.
I think we actually had the idea as we were riding down Dakota year before this.
Right. And we were kind of in a place where after I got my first bike and the two of us were riding regularly and we were in the same state again, we kind of got into this flow of, I live down in Denver, he lives up in Greeley, and every time we would meet up for a family gathering, there would be an obligatory 3 to 4 hour sidebar of the two of us talking bikes nonstop, often leading into standing by the family computer, pulling up images and stats and old bikes, often to the break of dawn, and then being very hungover for our social obligations the next day. And we've kind of just been feeding off of each other's enthusiasm and excitement and ideas for so long that we kind of had to make the podcast and just funnel all that energy into something somewhat productive. So, I mean, these are like all the research we do and everything we bring to the show are things that we would have done anyway. It's just that's just kind of how we've gotten to be.
Yeah, that comes through. I have to say, just under the heading of log rolling again, Swiggy, your soliloquy about how Top Gun didn't cause the Ninja caused Top Gun, had me laughing for like a whole day, and I thought it was an incredibly culturally aware and smart assessment of of that debate. Congratulations to you on that. I really think that people should go back and listen to that episode just for that 5 minutes.
Well, I think I will say I put way more time into preparing that than I'd be
comfortable admitting.
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's the big secret, right? Behind anybody who's good on their feet is they're not actually on their feet at all. They came prepared. Well, I know. Pete, I think you said you have a kid.
I have two.
You have two. Swiggy, I don't know about you. Do you think your kids will ride?
Well, I think another thing we've said on the show a few times is that motorcycle enthusiasm tends to peak at about 7 years old. And then it dips down and comes back up at about age 25. But so my kids are 2 and 7 right now. Sorry, 4 and 7. Jeez. Right. So they're a bit young, right? Like we're working on, mastering bicycles right now, but I'm sort of teaching them to ride bicycles as if they're motorcycles, right? So I'm like,
right.
Look where you want to turn, that kind of stuff, and okay, this is the most illuminating thing about my kids and bikes and what I talk to them about with it and everything, because they see me riding, so they naturally have questions and all of that. We were driving in my truck the other day, and normally when they see a motorcycle, they point it out and they go, "Oh, look at that motorbike," or "There's one over there," right? And they'll ask me like, "What kind of motorcycle is that?" And I'll tell them, "What's that called?" And it was like a couple weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, we're driving around, and my son sees this guy on some bike, and he goes, "That guy doesn't look very cool." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he goes, "He's not wearing a helmet." And I don't know, it was a strange, bizarre, but sort of very proud moment for me.
I get that.
And so I think that illuminates something, that whilst they don't, they're 4 and 7, so I don't know. I mean, I guess, Valentino Rossi started riding when he was 4, but, I don't think either of my kids will be Valentino Rossi. But they, I've started, like we were talking about permission, that door is open, right? So if my son turns 16 and he wants to start riding, a motorcycle to high school or something, I'll be like, well, okay, let's look at this pretty seriously, and we're going to start with safety classes and all of that, and we're going to do it the right way. And I definitely would like them to ride if it's something they really want to do, and something that they're passionate about. I'll absolutely help them at every single stage of it. But I don't know if I would necessarily push them super, super hard to do it. But, zero discouragement. I'm sort of just, kind of, I guess right now just, I guess this is everything you do as a parent, is you just sort of supply a role model, right? You just sort of show them, these are the sorts of things that are possible. So, that door is left open, as far as the permission goes. And that's, and at 4 and 7, that's really about where we are. But, they're already on board the idea that if they're going to ride, a helmet's required. So, a lot of people would consider that a big win right there already. So,
yeah. So I guess maybe you might have seen this coming, but, pop quiz. What would be the best and worst bike in the world for introducing your kid to motorcycling?
Oh, okay. Well, let's see. Something I would... It's tough to say because we got to think what's going to be not too horrible, about like 10 years from now, right?
Right.
It's like a Ninja 250, but man, those are all going to be in pretty rough shape by then. So what's coming out now that I guess maybe one of the what's that like that Husqvarna, that 301, the Svartpillen?
The Vitpillen.
Vitpillen, yeah. I bet those will be like pretty cheap and reasonable, and those are a pretty good design. Just some sort of standard bike, fairly reasonable power, but, something easy to operate, but, with a little bit of pizzazz, a little bit, something a little bit different than what's going to be, than what you would normally see them ride. I don't know, for some reason, I just imagine if my son turns 16 and he wants to get a bike, he's going to want something weird, because he's a little bit of an odd kid, and I like that about him. And then the worst would be anything not fuel injected.
I was going to say the best bike would be any model that's under $1,500 and has fuel injection and ABS, which I think we're going to see a lot of in the next, within 5 to 10 years. Maybe a CBR 500R. Yeah. Or who knows? I mean, maybe the cost of an electric bike will be pretty decent by then. It might be a current generation Zero that's a pretty good buy for someone to start with.
Yeah.
That's a best worst bike, not this week, but 10 years from now. That's gonna be a new segment. Best worst bike in the future.
Well, those were pretty good answers for right off the cuff, and I have to agree with you. I mean, I love that there are people out there who are still, mastering the dark arts of carburetors, and I love how old things, look and smell. But man, fuel injection and ABS. I just love that I can take the cover off my bike in the spring and put the key in and push the button and it goes.
Yeah, for anyone
I'm with you on that.
Yeah, anyone that has an obsession with carburetors, try rejetting and putting different pipes on, or even changing the carburetors on a CB350 at altitude and get that bike to run correctly. And then tell me how in love you are with carburetors. And there's nothing wrong with carburetors, but I'm not sure about how sacred we need to hold that, right? Fuel injection's been around since the 40s, right? So
I think the opinion of someone from Colorado carries extra weight on this question. I'm in full agreement. So I was kind of thinking, ever since last winter, which when Robert Pandya was making the rounds with his Give a Shift initiative, to try to kind of rejuvenate the sport, a lot of podcasters and a lot of writers have been talking about the challenge of getting young people into the sport. I personally am not so sure that we're not succeeding already. I haven't seen really good data, but let's imagine for a minute that it's a problem. And I'm wondering what you guys, as a sort of multi-generational riding family, what's your take on encouraging young people to do this in the context of what's good for the sport?
Okay. Well, we've discussed this at length on the show, actually, and our sort of thing, our take on this is, the next time you're thinking of, you're thinking of spending, $150 on a relative or something for Christmas or a birthday or something, why not the MSF course? Like, it's a fun weekend, even if the person has no thoughts that this is something that they might do, it's still fun, right? It's like, you wouldn't think twice of, sending someone, for a whole day of snowmobiling, right? So, it's not that different. They get to spend a fun weekend learning this new thing that they can do something with or not. But at least someone gets started out sort of the correct way when you do that. And it's a pretty small investment to help create a lifetime rider.
Yep.
That's sort of my take on it there. I don't know. Do you have anything else on that, Swigs?
I would say that, as much as we all love riding and we want more people to ride, I do have somewhat of, an ethical objection to heavily pushing motorcycling onto somebody, especially if it's somebody who, you could influence who might not be all that confident in it. because motorcycling is dangerous and it does require a lot of responsibility. I think gifting an MSF course is probably the maximum amount of pressure on someone to ride that I would approve of. And I think beyond that, it's really just about being enthusiastic about bikes and telling your own stories and sharing with others.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. That's actually kind of how I feel. So when all that buzz was happening last winter, I got a call from Liza Miller at Motorcycles and Misfits, because we connected the previous fall when I'd first fired up my podcast, and they were really supportive, as you know, of the community. And anyway, so she called me and had an idea about how we might be able to help Panjit, promote the sport through the podcasting community. And in the course of that conversation, I said to her, look, I have to be honest with you. I feel really conflicted about the idea of actively encouraging anybody to ride. I would support anybody who wanted to ride. I would be delighted to share whatever I think I know about how to do it and how to avoid the mistakes and all the joys that I get out of it. But I just can't make myself pitch it to somebody, just exactly as you say, sweetie. And so her answer to that was, look, it's ultimately their choice to make. Now, she's, kind of a tough-minded character, so you'd sort of expect that from her. But I just thought it was interesting, like she was quite firm that, look, it's up to them in the end. How do you react to that?
How do I react to that? So our idea, I guess I have to sort of repeat something. Another thing we've said on the show is our sort of view of bikes is different than a lot of people's might be, in that we've lived all over the world when we were kids. And we've seen motorcycles and scooters in a lot of different cultures and being used in a lot of different ways, as pleasure vehicles, as something as just pure utilitarian, and a lot of things in between. So, there's a lot of people on this planet for which a small little 125 is an absolute necessity, to make their life work. And there's a lot of people that just have some, crazy, Panigale that no one ever needs in their life, but is still a great thing to have. And I like to just sort of remind everybody that doesn't see themselves riding, that there's a lot of different things that motorcycles can be. And I'll talk to a lot of people about motorcycles and let them know that there's many, many different ways to do it, and try to sort of enlighten them that there's a way that it might fit into your life that you haven't realized. Now, if they're a person that's just like, no, I don't like bikes, I don't like the idea of it, that's where I stop, right? So I'm somewhere in between where, I'm always going to talk to people about motorcycles. And, like I said, I've said it many times, I sort of just wander around all day just hoping someone brings up the subject of motorcycles so I can talk about it. But I'm sort of with Swiggy and sort of with you that if they're just like, no, it's not for me, well, then there's no need to pursue that. But I will always sort of give a couple examples of how maybe it could fit into your life, and you don't realize it. And I don't, go up to someone and say like, well, do you realize you could buy this 150 Honda scooter and get this amazing mileage, and on these short trips that you're doing in this state with very little rain, like this could replace your car for 90% of its use or something like that. Or I'm like, oh, do you realize that instead of, going to the drag strip with your Mitsubishi Evo, you could get this kind of motorcycle and like race on a more competitive level, like for a lot less money or whatever it is,
Right.
I just sort of go around kind of generally talking about bikes and different ways to see bikers and different ways to see motorcycles, kind of hoping that someone just sort of kind of half listening to me will be like, oh, I guess I never saw it that way. And that might lead them down a path that'll get them into bikes.
Right.
I don't know if that's a direct answer to your question, but it's an answer, I guess. So.
Well, there probably isn't. There probably isn't a drag. I mean, that's probably why I asked it, I guess. I mean, in our family, both my wife and all three of the kids have shown some interest, and it's clearly because I just love it so much, and so naturally, there's a desire to connect with that, and maybe some curiosity about whether they might have the same sort of experience. And I just clam up about it, and but at the end of the day, I feel as ambivalent as your answers just were. In that, on the one hand, I don't want to have to come home and have my wife say, "You killed the kids," but on the other hand, I just feel like a prick for keeping this to myself. And it's family, right?
Yeah, I mean, now having said that, we don't want to push people too far. As if anyone ever approaches me or Swiggy at work and they have some sort of interest about motorcycles, like, whoa, like, stop the presses, like, you and me, let's have a meeting, let's go to Craigslist, let's look up when the next safety course is, what kind of gear are you gonna buy, you need to have a snow rated helmet, like, no one will just rush. It's like I have an employee right now. He's 19 and he's thinking about getting into riding, and it's like probably he sits at home. And, if he just thinks about motorcycles, he's expecting me to jump from behind the couch and be like, "Do you need more advice? Like, how can I help you with?" Right? So, we are, with the cautious answers that, we gave about getting people into riding, make no mistake, like, we're very, very much still in favor of people riding.
Yeah, and I guess families too, obviously. Now, you guys have done some big rides together. Do you have anything big planned coming up?
Well, let's see. I think being not that far from it, I think we want to do a trip to Sturgis, but I always go to Sturgis like way off season because the reality is it's a great place to go ride. I just don't want to be there when all the roads are crowded and filled with drunk people. And I've been working on this idea, and I haven't gotten everyone down for it yet, but I want to ride to Cancun and back. I want to just take all the kids' wives and girlfriends, and we can sell this trip to them on like, hey, look, everyone gets to go to Cancun, right? And you guys all stay at a resort, but you guys will fly, we'll just ride, So... go down there, spend a couple days in some resort, and then ride all the way back. And it's weird, too, because everyone keeps saying, like, oh, that sounds so dangerous. I'm like, yeah, it's Mexico. Like, it's a country filled with normal people, right? Like, and they're like, well, aren't you afraid of getting, like, ripped off? I'm like, look, if you're some sort of bandit whose business is, ripping off American tourists, I don't think some highway in the center of Mexico is necessarily your best fishing hole. Right. You maybe get worried as you get closer to the resorts, but I feel like Mexico's just sort of filled with like normal people who happen to be Mexican, right?
Yeah. So just don't take a GS and go riding up a riverbed somewhere, and you should be okay.
Exactly. Yeah. But I still haven't got everybody sold on this. And then I think the latest harebrained scheme is, I don't know, at some point, one of these years, I want to do some sort of stupid like distance timed race thing, like the Lake Erie Loop that they talk about on Cleveland Moto. I feel like with Swiggy and I's riding system, we could make a really good stab at a record time doing that.
That sounds fun.
But those are the ideas we've got cooking right now, and of course, who knows what the weather's going to be like, but maybe even riding to AIM in Vegas in October.
Yeah, I would love that. I'm obviously riding is not an option for me, but I'm definitely going down for that. I'd love to meet you guys.
Yeah, let's do it.
Now, you guys, just sort of before I let you go, I'm curious about something. You guys actually sing, and it sounds to me like you might play your intro and outro music. Is there a band in the family too? Sort of.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, we all play guitar as well. we were struggling with what we were going to do for the intro, and one of my strange party tricks is I basically know every single Arlo Guthrie monologue song, note for note and word for word. And we were just thinking, like, what are we going to do? Well, what kind of says something about us? And we were like, well, this whimsical Arlo Guthrie motorcycle song. So we just sat down real quick, and very poorly I recorded a guitar riff. And I don't know, we just sort of thought it would be fun to just sing a bit of it live in and out of every show.
It didn't sound like your first try. Whoever was playing the guitar sounded like they knew their way around it. So I wondered if there was a whole other family story there for somebody else's podcast.
Well, I did used to travel, like, playing in a country band, and guitars are also definitely another family obsession, but probably not quite as enthusiastic not quite an obsession as motorcycles, but definitely another one that a lot of us share.
And often described as a sickness.
Right.
So, do you guys have any parting words for the riding families or the riders who hope to have a riding family someday? Any sage advice from 3 generations?
I guess it's leave the door open, right? Like like I said, like earlier, a lot of people sort of, for whatever reason, feel they need this permission to start, right? And I think if most people think about when they started riding, I even described my story where I was saying I was like sitting alone in my apartment. But the truth is that a very dear friend of our family had said to me about 2 or 3 days earlier, he's like, you should get a bike, Pete. It'll be cheap to maintain and own. You're young. It'll be cost effective for you. That's, because looking to buy another car at the time as well. And he goes, you should get a bike. And then it just sort of moved around in my brain a little bit. And then all of a sudden I realized, oh, yeah, right. And so I think if everyone's really honest, they can recall some sort of moment where someone made the suggestion to them or sort of granted them the permission, whether they realized it at the moment or not. So, whether it's an actual blood family or it's just a group of friends that ride together, at some point, to develop that family, someone near you or it's going to be near you kind of needs to get that permission, right? And so, if you're just positive about riding and you like to talk to people about riding, I think whether they're a blood family or not, you're going to end up with a motorcycle family. And, be positive and leave that door open so people can find that permission.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's very wise. Swiggy, you want to ice that cake or?
Ditto. I think Peter put it perfectly.
Yeah, me too. Well, guys, this has just been great. I'm so grateful for your time and for your support on this, which I will explain to my listeners in more detail when I finish this podcast. But I'm glad we could finally talk, and I really hope we get a chance to meet in person in Las Vegas or at some distant point. And if you decide you're going to take applications for adoption, put my name on the list. I'd like to be in your family.
There we go. No problem.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Later.
When our conversation was over, I struggled a little to decide what this episode was really about. I'd wanted to know what it was like to have a riding family, to have the people closest to you really understand, and what is and maybe isn't so great about that. And I guess selfishly, I wondered how to make peace with my own ambivalence about sharing the joys of riding with the people I love. I don't quite have the guilt and anxiety of the forum poster I quoted at the beginning of this episode, but I do keep this mostly to myself. But Pete and Swiggy brought something to the table that seems bigger and more fundamental to having motorcycles in your life, and that's this idea of permission. I thought there was a lot of wisdom in this as a strategy for dealing with loved ones who are moto-curious. Don't shut them out, but don't evangelize. Instead, let them know that they're free to choose, that you aren't going to judge or stand in their way, and that if they take that plunge, you'll be there for them. But it's more than a strategy, isn't it? It's kind of the whole point of becoming a rider. For those guys, for me, and I bet for a lot of us, The moment we decided to ride was the moment we decided in some way to take possession of our lives. It was kind of a coming of age, whether you did it at 16 or 60. That's a pretty powerful thing, and I wonder if it's maybe where some of the joy of doing this really comes from. The realization that the only permission you ever really needed was from yourself. And once you learn that trick in life, there really seems to be no looking back. One final note. I said at the top of this episode that I would explain why it sounded different, why I was on the phone and my guests sounded like they were in a studio. Well, the first time we tried to record this interview, I was having internet problems, part of the joy of country living. Well, Pete and Swiggy reacted as if they'd just found me by the side of the road with a flat tire. They instantly suggested that I phone them, they would record the episode with their gear, and they'd send it to me to finish. And they were as good as their word. The recording was in my inbox the same evening we spoke. Which proves, I guess, that even if you ride alone, if you have a motorcycle, you have a family. Well, thanks for listening. You'll find show notes for this episode at thismotorcyclelife.com, and that's also how you can reach me if you have questions, comments, or suggestions. I'd love to hear from you. You can also say hi on Instagram at thismotolife, where I like to post pictures of bikes I find on the street. And Pete and Swiggy's podcast, NoCo Moto, is available on iTunes, among other places, and you should definitely check it out. For this episode's playlist recommendation, I found another family collaboration. This is the husband and wife team of Luke Doucette and Melissa McClelland. The band is called Whitehorse, and they hail from Hamilton, Ontario. We saw them play in a small community hall this past spring, and it was more fun than any concert in recent memory. The track is called Downtown. I picked it because it makes me think of riding in the city at night, which is one of my favorite guilty motorcycling pleasures. Not that I'm promoting it, of course. You can get it wherever you like to buy your music. And in the meantime, keep staying alive out there.
And it's killing me.